Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the Global Glug. My name is Renato Molo, and today we are going to be virtually in Grenada with Jane Nurse, marketing manager at Renegade Distilleries. Grenada is an island located on the Lesser Antilles, south of the Lesser Antilles, north of Venezuela, just 140 kilometers off the Venezuelan coast. It's an island also known as the Spice Island. The Spice Island, why? Because a lot of spices are produced there: cinnamon, nutmeg, cacao. And this is recent. Before that, of course, sugarcane was the main agricultural income of the island. A lot of sugarcane was produced, and it's during the British that the peak was achieved. Imagine that Grenada used to sell 3.7, roughly 4 millions of liters of rum on a yearly basis, and there were more than 100 sugarcane estates and sugarcane mills on the island. So there was huge numbers. It was maybe the top 5 rum producers back then. And then after this peak, the sugarcane industry declined constantly, slowly, until the beginning of the 1900s. Just 2 distilleries survived: River Antoine and the Grenada Distilleries. Grenada Distilleries, it's a distillery which is more modern. I think they resumed in the 1930s. And River Antoine is the most iconic, maybe of the whole Caribbean. It's the only one which has no power and is still running just with wood, fire, and has equipment which was installed 200 years ago. So we are going to see how Renegade rums differ from the existing rum producer in Grenada. We know that Renegade distillers are really terroir focused. Jane will tell us more about it and what exactly they are doing, what they did, what they are doing now, and what's the plan in the future. So I hope you will enjoy the interview as I did, and until next time, bye bye.
Hi Renato, it's so great to talk to you again after you've been to Grenada. Really excited to be talking to you today, also because I think it's the very first podcast that I'm doing with somebody in Cartagena.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. It's a brand new podcast, as I told you, so still not that many followers, but yeah, who knows, maybe this is going
we'll
to grow.
We'll work on that.
Exactly, yes. But yeah, I'm just curious about you. So of course we met in Grenada a couple of months ago. Amazing tour we had. Thank you again so much for your time. I really learned a lot. I just wanted to ask you about your background. How did you end up in Grenada? And before that, what were you doing?
Wow. All right, let's see if we can get a short version of this together. So I'm Grenadian German, born in Germany, raised in Germany, but my father is Grenadian, so I've always had a love for the island. And I've been living in Grenada now for 7 years. And before I became part of the rum industry, rum family, my background really is environmental law, sustainable development. I used to be a climate activist, so a completely different field.
Okay, yeah.
It's a bit of a fluke.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, and when I first started out with Renegade, it was 7 years ago when I came out to Grenada to settle here, that on a plane flying out, I met one of the founders of the project. They told me about it at the time. And there's a lot of Grenadians. I was very protective of my island, so I was a bit skeptical. What are these people trying to do? Mm-hmm. But from a chance encounter on the plane, it turned into a really fascinating journey. I've joined Renegade 5 years ago, and it's been really an amazing project to be part of in a place like Grenada, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Why? Because, of course, Grenada, there is historically, there was a lot of rum. There is River Antoine, which is if the oldest one, I think, on the island.
The oldest, yeah.
Exactly.
The oldest in the island, and I think almost the oldest still working distillery with almost original equipment in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really interesting juxtaposition, finding almost the oldest and one of the newest distilleries, right next to each other, 20-minute drive apart.
Exactly, yes, it's a big contrast. So I visit both. I visit before River Antoine, before coming to yours, and of course the technology. You have everything new there. Everything is built from scratch. Can you maybe tell us why Mark Rainier, so the CEO of the company? I saw some videos on YouTube. It's really interesting to see how the process was. I saw a video of him getting to Grenada, and he was so desperate the first time he met the authorities. Sometimes it seems like here in Cartagena. No? I mean, it's always difficult to start. Why did it end up to build in Grenada and not other places? Because I read he also tried in other places like La Réunion. If you maybe can tell us more about this process.
It's a really, really interesting question, and I don't want to put words into Mark's mouth since he's not here to speak for himself. But and just a little bit of background for those who are not familiar with Mark Rainier. I mean, he's got a long-standing career in wine and whiskey and also in rum, from being a wine merchant to being an independent bottler of rum to developing his own distilleries, buying up old distilleries, retrofitting them, and then also building a distillery completely from scratch in Grenada. And what combines, or what is sort of the overarching theme of all of these different projects, the core of what he does always goes back to the idea of presenting terroir and spirit, really working with the raw material and allowing the raw material to speak. And as we know, in wine, this is long established tradition and heritage. People have been working parcels of land for thousands of years. In some cases, know exactly what to expect. But in the whiskey and also in the rum industry, that focus on terroir was, in the beginning, frankly, outlandish. And I think now it's become a buzzword, and sometimes it gets a little bit muddled. What does it actually mean? And so how does that relate to Grenada? In his quest for creating a complex and just flavorful rum, he was looking at, okay, how can we do quality production? As an independent bottler, he was looking for rum all over the world, and he found that he was getting less and less quality that was tickling, I think, a lower cerebral experience of the drink. And so it kind of very renegade. It's like, well, if I can find it, I'll make it myself. And so it was almost a 10-year journey of looking at different distilleries all over the world, from the Caribbean to the Pacific, back to the Caribbean, to try and find an older distillery to buy and retrofit, as he's done with his project in Waterford, where we make whiskey in Ireland. Now, pretty much through serendipity or happenstance, whatever you want to call it, he came to Grenada eventually in 2015, and he toured the island here, and just looking at the terrain, I mean, you've seen it for yourself. Not only is the island gorgeous, but if you look at it from an agricultural perspective, there is so much terrain variability, terroirs, on steroids, if you like. And so I think that immediately sparked an interest. Okay, yes, the landscape and the soils and the microclimates themselves, they provide such an amazing canvas that why not try sugarcane here? And I think, and I'm not sure necessarily that I was the thinking at the time, but I think by observation and hindsight, Grenada is an interesting location to pick. We're not embedded in a particular rum style, if you like. You think of Spanish style rum, French style rum, a French Caribbean agricole rum, right? There is a very specific expectation that comes with rums from certain locations. And I think with trying to provide a very new, innovative approach to rum making, Grenada was a beautiful setting because, on the one hand, yes, we're a rum nation. We're not necessarily known as much for our rums because we keep them mostly to ourselves. We don't export as much.
Yes.
So Grenada never had the same profile or prominence as Barbados or Jamaica. Or Guyana, or any of the other great producers in the region, but it is part of our heritage. And in fact, we have a dual heritage. We have French and English colonial heritage that has also informed our rum making ways. But in Grenada, we have 3 distilleries, and every single distillery has a completely unique style of making rum. And so I think this, and of the 3, I count us as part of that. But within that, essentially, it gave us the leeway to have complete freedom in approaching this from a new angle, a new perspective, without being beholden to existing traditions. And I finish it at that, the last point, and I think what we've achieved or tried to accomplish with this project, even though it's a really modern, innovative new distillery, it is actually building on the meticulous craft of tradition, in the sense that we're really working with the raw material and we're trying to create greatest quality by modern technology, not to lose or homogenize individuality, but really to extol the individuality of place. So I leave it at that and give you the next question to lead over.
Yes, so you said it, you were mentioning terroir, which is really important. I know that there is, you told it, there are two more distilleries, River Antoine and Clark's Court. They are both located, one north and one south in this of the island. I visited River Antoine. I couldn't make it to go to Clark's because my wife would kill me. After 5 distilleries in 10 days, she was kind of fed up. I understand her. But yeah, so I know that Clark's Court, they produce molasses-based rums, imported molasses, and River Antoine 100% cane juice, as you do. So how can you define the terroir? I mean, is it easier to define a terroir with cane juice rum, or could you also define a terroir rum, say, with 100% local sourced molasses? How would be the difference? If they're difficult questions, I know.
Sticky topics. Thank God you're not too popular yet. Otherwise, I can just already see stones.
No, just your knowledge. I mean, of course, it's a really technical question, but I think that cane juice rum can really be more easier to find the terroir instead of maybe. I mean, it's maybe more obvious to find these nuances.
Well, let's break it down. Let's go back to basics in terms of our production styles of the different distilleries, and then let's look at how we have been observing terroir in our rums. So if you look at, let me start with Rivers, actually. Rivers is the oldest, most traditional distillery on the island, and actually what they do is they will harvest the sugarcane locally. They will crush it, get the cane juice, and then they'll boil it, condense it through a set of old copper bowls, essentially huge bowls, fired by bagasse fire. But then actually they will use a little bit of molasses as well, imported molasses, because what they'll do is for the fermentation, they're looking at a Brix level of 18. So Brix, for those who are not aware, it's essentially the level of sucrose that you can measure in your sugarcane juice. So that's how they hold a certain level of consistency. So sugarcane is very responsive to moisture. So in the dry season where we prefer or harvest preferably, the Brix content usually is supposed to be a little bit higher because it's more concentrated. When you end up harvesting in the rainy season, the plant absorbs more moisture, and so you have a little bit less sucrose in there. So that's what they do in terms of their raw material preparation. Now, when you come to Clark's Court, historically, actually, that's also quite important to point out, Clark's Court used to be a sugar factory. So up to the 80s, I think, Grenada was actually producing sugar for its own sugar production as well. And so we had a sugar mill down there in the south, and they would use the leftover molasses from their own sugar production to make rum. So you could argue maybe that actually that molasses, because it was produced in Grenada from Grenadian sugarcane, possibly maybe had also some traces of place, right? But because it's been processed so many times or so much, people usually argue that with molasses, you start losing the connection to terroir because it's just too much processed as a material. And once you start importing from different places, you definitely lose the connection to geography, to location, So if you get molasses from Trinidad or from Grenada or wherever else in the world, there is no link with the raw material of where the rum is produced. Now, flash forward, enter Renegade. So what we've done is not only are we, getting sugarcane, we grow the sugarcane in 15 farms actually at this point. 15 different farms, and they're all fairly small, between 20 to 40 acres, maybe a little bit larger than that, but really fairly, artisan level. For Grenada, it's big, but in the larger scale of things, it's very small. The size of Grenada is the equivalent to a plantation or sugarcane farm in Brazil or sort of South Africa or Australia. And so, because for those who don't know about Grenada, have never heard of us before, we are not in Spain, it's not Granada, it's Grenada. And we're a small volcanic island in the Lesser Antilles, and our terrain can go from sea level to 800 meters within 5 to 10 kilometers, right? So there is a lot of variation that takes place very quickly. The soils are mostly volcanic in nature, and the differentiation between soils is mostly due to weather erosion or weathering. And so every bay, every land tongue has its own little microclimate. And within a farm, so this is how we dissect it, we have a farm. Within the farm, we have different terroirs, and then each terroir can be subdivided into different parcels. And those will then be planted with different sugarcane varieties that we've brought in, and we know exactly what they are. We know what our portfolio is. And so we can then play with these different varieties and see how does that variety, if we plant it in the south of the island, in let's say a south-facing aspect, versus that same variety planted in the north of the island in a flat floodplain, how do these different, or how do two same varieties express themselves under different environmental conditions? And this is what we consider terroir, the interaction of the plant with the soil, with the microclimate, the way it's grown. And so, to come and answer your question, when we produce our rums, we're trying to keep our production processes as similar as possible. So that when we see variation, particularly in our white on-age spirits, when we see variation in flavor, we know it comes back to where that sugarcane was grown and how the environment has helped to express that sugarcane. For instance, in terms of, was it a dry environment? Are we getting more bricks? Was it a very wet environment? Are we getting less bricks? But the exact leverage, what is the parameters that express flavor in sugarcane is not as greatly understood. And I'll draw the last conclusion here, or a comparison. If you think of wine, where we've been speaking about terroir for decades, for centuries to some extent, we have a much better understanding of what type of grape will interact with what kind of soil, what kind of flavor you will be getting out of it, what kind of production methods are linked to it. Sugarcane traditionally was grown for yield, output, not for its flavorness, flavorfulness, right? So in that way, we're chartering fairly new territory, but even within the first 3 years of production, the white rums that we brought into the market and now also our new aging stock that's slowly entering, we've seen drastic variations in terms of how the flavor expressed. And that is the effect of terroir. It's not because we're playing with different yeasts. It's not because we're playing with wildly different fermentation times. We're not adding anything to our fermentation. We have two different styles of distillation methods, so that can have an effect. But ultimately, it all goes back to the raw material and how it's interacted with its environment.
Speak now.
Yeah, there was a little bit of feedback. Yeah?
Exactly.
Is that better?
Now it's better. Okay, yeah. Yes,
okay,
and to my next question, thank you very much. I read that after 1980, there was a lack of a drop of sugarcane production in the island. I don't know exactly why, but how could you convince to the farmers, because you told me you're working with farmers, to get back to this business? Because of course it was also related to the slavery, it was also related to the colonial system. How did you manage that to get them back to work? Sorry.
So the first challenge really for this project was when Mark arrived on the island. He was like, well, great environment for sugarcane, but where's all the sugarcane? And as you said, in the past, Grenada was a sugarcane producing nation. Where you arrived at the airport, all of that back in the 70s, 60s, 50s was all sugarcane land, actually. Today, when you drive through, you would not have the slightest clue that this used to be under agricultural production in the first place, and secondly, that it was sugarcane production. And so when we came, or when Mark came to Grenada, the idea initially was that they would replicate the same model that they've been using in Ireland for the whiskey production at Waterford. So that meant finding local farmers that provide the raw material, you buy it off them at a certain price, and you make your spirit, everybody is happy. In Grenada, it didn't work that way because our agricultural model or structure is very much subsistence farming based. And large-scale sugarcane production hardly exists. The only other producers at a larger scale of sugarcane would be River Antoine. So they grow their own sugarcane on around, I think, 300 to 400 acres of land that they have. And other than that, they will buy in here and there from local farmers. But for the capacity that we have, our distillery is set up to produce up to 1 million liters of alcohol a year. There was nowhere on the island enough sugarcane to be grown. And so while we were trying to convince farmers to go back into growing sugarcane, it was a very difficult proposition for various reasons. A, who are these people we've never heard of before telling us to go and grow sugarcane? Who are you? There is no distillery to be seen. Why would we do that, right? Because when they started out, where we are producing right now didn't exist. It just didn't exist. So you're telling a farmer to invest their resources, little resources they have, into something where they don't know that it's going to go anywhere, right?
Of course.
So that was the first hurdle. The second hurdle was that sugarcane is extremely labor intensive, especially with the kind of terrain that we have, because Grenada isn't flat like Barbados, for instance, or have the landmass like of a Martinique, where you can have larger, maybe gently undulating or flat sugarcane plains. Grenada is mostly hills, right? So it's very difficult to grow sugarcane in sort of like a industrialized manner. And so that was very difficult to convince farmers, okay, we can grow more than 5 or 10 or 20 acres of sugarcane, which is what we're doing now. And then lastly, or maybe 2 more points, the other thing obviously was also, and it's actually not so obvious, but the average age of farmers was quite high as well. So, it's just too hard labor. And then the other problem, you may have a farmer, but they don't necessarily have the title to the land that they farm. And that's really important, because if we work with a farmer, we need to make sure that they're the owner of the land. And so in Grenada in general, land tenure and titles and deeds can be quite difficult. Grenada, interestingly enough, just as a side tidbit, has one of the highest sort of private land ownerships, like distributed land ownership, because I was part of a Land to the Masses program way back when. But it also means that it's quite, there can be large tracts of land, but then there's also lots of little bits in between. And so finding somebody who is both a landowner and a farmer can be actually quite hard. And so that forced us essentially in the end to create our own agricultural subsidiary. And so we are the farmer. We employ over 100, sometimes up to 120 people in a high season to farm the farms that we lease. And so we have lease agreements for 5 years. So we make this contract with the landowner, and then we bring our own farming team to prepare the land, plant the sugarcane, maintain the farms, do the harvest. So it's completely under our control. And that has actually allowed us, it was a blessing in disguise, it's allowed us full traceability. Because as you know, in developing countries, our systems keeping isn't as standardized as in developed countries. So making sure this is your logbook for the varieties that have gone in there. This is when they were planted. If any fertilizers are used, this is what is used, how much it was used, when it was used. If there's any diseases, this is what we found, this is how we treated it. We have complete traceability and we can track it, which if we hadn't taken on the farming ourselves, I think that level of data collection would have been much harder to accomplish. Yeah, we have the same thing again. Some reverb.
I
don't know what happened.
If it's
I
maybe,
just flipped my laptop a little bit.
it's maybe the wind. I don't know if it's maybe already. No?
Could be. It's actually very windy today. So sorry, that was a long spiel, but I really love the farming aspect, and I think it's so important. And one of the most important contributions I think Renegade and Kenko have made to the local economy in terms of bringing a level of dignity and respect back to the idea of sugarcane farming and divorcing it, or maybe not divorcing, acknowledging the pain that slavery has inflicted on the enslaved, but also recognizing that our natural assets, if we add value to them, added value for export, but also for the local market, it's actually something that can help us revitalize our rural areas.
Yeah, I know. When we were talking when I was there, you told me that you are also developing now. You hired a person, which is going to develop a bit the internal market because there's a lot. I mean, River Antoine, they sell everything on the island basically, so there is
Yes.
a huge market there. And why not positioning your products and also trying to sell them locally and show what the locals produce for local people, what they can also have at the end of the process. Good rum.
Yeah. I mean, there is pride in showing what Grenadians can do. I mean, we've done
Exactly.
so much work both on the farming and the distillery and putting something together, which is really quite incredible. You mentioned early on, Mark being very frustrated when he first came in because it
Yeah.
was so slow moving. And I think he brought in an amazing vision, a challenging vision. And if he hadn't had I mean, he's very good in finding good people and bring them onto the team. And I think one of the strengths of the project really is that he found some uh, incredibly talented local team to put that vision into life. And I would, they're not with me here on the chat today, but I just want to throw out their names, like Devin Date, our distillery manager, head distiller, wears multiple hats, homegrown talent. Graham Williams, who was one of the first supporters, actually from a Westerhall Rum estate, one of the first supporters who helped us build a nursery, who's really thrown his weight behind this project to get it off the ground. All the folks that we recruited in the process. So this has been an incredible collaborative process between Grenadians and also our international partners. But without the Grenadian stock at home, you wouldn't have been able or it wouldn't have been possible to push a project this challenging and complex to fruition. So it's something I think we can be really proud of, and we shouldn't be shy and share the fruits of our labor with our home market too.
Exactly. And imagine it was certainly not easy also the logistical part of all, because you said the distillery was not existing 5 years ago. So I know you have a Brazilian mill, you have some tanks coming from Germany, you told me, you have a column still, you have plenty of stuff that you had to import all over the world. I know I've been to Grenada. I can tell everyone it's tough to drive there. It's a rail. The roads are really small and it's hilly, as you said. So, how can you? You told me it was really complicated to get everything to the island. Can you just quickly tell us how the process was, and
Yeah.
how did you manage to? I guess the port is in St. George's. So getting there with everything, I imagine you had to shut down the whole island just for you.
Well, at some point, kind of almost had to. So just so people can visualize, if this is my hand and this is Grenada, the port and the capital are down here in the southwest of the island, and the distillery is up here in the northeast. There's a mountain range that goes from the top of my finger down to the bottom here, and the roads along the coast are very winding and narrow. And the distillery sits at the cul-de-sac, or the end of a cul-de-sac of a very rickety dirt road. So when you first arrive there like today, you just think I don't know, something has landed out of outer space in the middle of a beautiful nowhere. It's a bit wild. But no, you're right. I mean, I think we broke ground. That was a little bit just before I joined the company. I think 2018, late 2018, 2019. And when I first went up to the site, it was just a huge hole in the ground. I could not imagine what it would be like and what it looks like today. And so we brought in equipment from Scotland, our stills. Foresight produced our copper pot with double retort. We have a modern column still. We brought in equipment from South Africa, our biomass boiler that we use to create steam and energy, our organic Rankine cycle turbine from Germany. We've brought in a mill from Brazil, and experts from all over the place, really. Welding teams from Trinidad. And so we started with the construction process, and I think initially it was scheduled for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. I think it was a very ambitious schedule for working something of that scale in the Caribbean. And then we got hit by COVID. And that really rammed like a spanner into the works,
Yeah.
because think of the hardest hit countries, Brazil and South Africa, and this is where some of our main engineers were coming from. So we really were in a pickle. And one of the things I'm really proud of with this project, and I think stood us in good stead, and is maybe also a privilege some of the staff are not even necessarily aware of. Most of the people, process operators, distillers, mill operators who work to this day in a distillery, they were quite young, and they got recruited during the construction process. And so whenever we had our expert teams coming in, they were paired with our Grenadian team, and they learned on the job to build, to commission, and to operate all of this equipment. And so our operators have extremely good knowledge or sort of understanding of the equipment that they're operating, because they had to put it together themselves, and partially out of necessity because COVID precluded us from having the expertise right on the ground. It also caused a lot of delays, difficulties, workarounds. But I think at some point we even had to resort to using augmented reality glasses. So our guys on the ground could communicate with the engineers abroad, so that they could essentially move their hands like human robots. But in
Incredible.
that process, they also learned, right,
Yeah.
so much about the distillery. And I wouldn't say no, we are perfect. Even as we are operating now, we're still learning, we're still growing into our equipment and the synergy with the farming and making, the best product that we can make. So I think over time, even though we're starting at a really high, amazing, base level, it's only going to get better, because the experience that's growing and the maturity that's growing also within the team, that's one of the biggest contributions just in terms of human resource development and technological advancement in the space that we operate in. So I hope that answers the question. I've not brought a lot of other aspects in there as well, but I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense.
I'm satisfied. Thank you very much. I know
Right.
we have maybe 10 more minutes. Just wanted to ask you quickly about your rums. Of course, we are talking about rums.
Yes.
Your final product. I visited also, of course, where you are aging it. I know you have different types of barrels. You use wine barrels as well. You use Colombian oak. You told me. I think we just
we do.
yeah we
Yes.
just you just got it maybe a couple of days before you were there, and just quickly. I know you have basically three types of rum. You have the pre-cask series, you have the Etude series, and the Cuvée. Cuvée is the last one. Can you just quickly tell us the difference between these three types of rums, and what's the project in the future? What are you up for?
Yes. So as you already highlighted, we've got three major series that we released. We started 2020 with our pre-casks, essentially unaged white rum. Pre-cask, as the name says, it has not been in cask. Those rums, they're very interesting, quite unusual in the market, in that and I go just quickly a little bit through our production philosophy as well. When we harvest, we will usually do one field a day, one sugarcane variety from one field, from one terroir. And the distillery is designed to absorb one batch and process everything in one go. I think there's some reverb again in the audio, so let me just see if I can.
No, it's okay. It was okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So as I was saying, we go through one batch. So it's milled, then we inoculate it with a distiller's yeast that we've selected, and then it is fermented in closed horizontal fermenters, which is quite unusual. They're temperature controlled as well, so it allows us to really control the fermentation process to give the yeast the optimal environment. And then we can distill in either pot or column still distillation. And so initially, the goal of the project has always been, with Mark coming from the whiskey industry, sort of informed by that, 3 years of aging, then we go to the market. However, seeing how the project was delayed, seeing how people were really curious about what we were going to do, seeing that with rum, you actually don't have to wait for 3 years before you can go to the market, we actually then decided, let's take our unaged rums and showcase them, because actually in the unaged rums, it's where you show or really experience the terroir in the most unadulterated manner. And so this is the first series that we have. We did 5, released them in Europe, in the States, and a couple other places. And those are exciting, but they're very sort of nerdy and extremely sort of niche product. Then we moved on to the Etudes, and the name is inspired from French language. Say Etude, for those who know French, study. So it's indicating that we're taking the consumer to revisit some of those farms that we had bottled on the specific fields to see how have they evolved after first now meeting cask. And the cask that we use at Renegade, it's 4 types. It's all oak, but we use Virgin American oak. We use first fill ex-bourbon American oak. We use first fill red Rhine French premium oak. And we use the Colombian virgin oak, or virgin Colombian oak. And so with the etudes, what we've done is we've taken fairly young spirits. They're all between a year and a half to 2 years. And now you can see actually this really interesting balance of this vibrant, vivacious cane spirit starting to take on a little bit of maturity, but not being overtaken yet by the oak influence entirely. And that was something that was really fascinating to see, how actually the terroir is not immediately knocked out of a spirit, it actually still evolves with it. And now the latest range, which has won, I mean, just this last month was an amazing one for Renegade in terms of the awards, but our cuvee range is now really bringing all these pieces together. So Mark's vision has always been to create a complex rum, a rich, deep rum that has breadth and depth. And in order to create that, what you're trying to do is build layers and layers and layers of complexity on top of each other. And this is why we're taking a terroir approach. This is why we have these individual fields or parcels, if you like, with different sugarcane varieties, different distillation methods. So we have this ingredient cabinet of high quality notes, right? Like a hard note, a top note. And if you're a perfume maker, you can bring these together to create this beautiful ensemble. And so this is what we're doing now with the cuvées, where we're going back to a single farm. And if you go back to the hierarchy I mentioned earlier, we have the farm. So in the farm, we have multiple terroirs, and within the terroirs, you can have multiple parcels. So we'll bring that from one farm together, because there can be so much variation just within one farm, and create a cuvée that reflects that farm. We've also done our flagship, which is our Nova cuvée, which is the all-island cuvée.
Okay.
And I kid you not, when I first drank that rum outside of Grenada, I got goosebumps and I almost welled up, because I felt in the spiciness and the vivaciousness, all the aspects that make Grenada so special to me, I could feel that. And I thought, okay, Mark is on about something place, yeah, whatever, it's a marketing thing. But actually, when I experienced the Nova, that was not just a cerebral, but a visceral affirmation of what we do actually holds merit. And then last but not least, as part of that cuvée series, is our cuvée Aura. And I kept it as last because I feel I'm particularly excited about that one, because the precast were always more seen as a collector's item, an educational product as well, to bring people to a new class of rum agricole or pure cane rum. But yeah, no, let me just speak also to the Aura. This is our white precast cuvée. And I kept that one last but not least because I'm particularly excited how that has evolved. The precasts, our unaged rums, they were sort of our educational product, where we were introducing Renegade to the world, bringing people into the fold of our philosophy, showcasing terroir. But it was always almost seen more of like a little niche collector's maybe edition. And now we've had such great or interesting feedback with people saying, wow, it's amazing to see these white rums having complexity, having depth. They're not as refined as a aged rum, obviously. There is like this agricole vivaciousness and vibrancy about them. But actually, they have so much to offer on your taste palette. So we shouldn't underestimate white rums. We should give them credit because they can also and are a quality premium spirit. And so the Aura has been the evolution of the feedback that we got for the precasts, creating essentially a cuvée that brings together the most interesting unaged rums from our different farms. And I find that is, maybe as a young spirit myself, I feel like that I really resonate with the evolution of that particular cuvée. And I hope that gives you a good overview of the ensemble of product ranges that we have put out into the world for the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how rum, how you are approaching rum with this wine vision, because of course wine is kind of the same, different terroir, different types of wines, and then you make assemblage, how they say in French. So you are making blends of these different products, and yeah, a lot of people sometimes they say, yeah, there is no terroir in the rum industry because of molasses. It comes from different parts of the world. No, you are the proof, living proof that terroir exists. And when I did the tasting with your rums, it was incredible to see how also the same Lake Cat one I tasted, you had the upper one and the lower one. It's incredible how different they are. It's the same place, it's the same spot on the map, if I can say so. But as you said, one is upper, so there's more windy. You told me it was more drier, was more rough, the conditions. And this happens also in the wine industry, of course, when you have a grape which is suffering heat or less humidity. The grape, of course, will give different flavors. Okay, I think.
And I think on that note, sorry, don't interrupt.
Please.
I can give you an extra 5 if necessary.
Okay.
On that note, terroir, while coined in the wine industry, obviously it is not the concept, or let's say the mechanics of it. They're not restricted to wine. You can find terroir in any raw material if you work with the raw material. My first encounter actually with terroir wasn't in rum or spirits or wine, it was in chocolate. And I think you will resonate with that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that Grenada produces is high premium cocoa. In the past, we would mostly export the cocoa, never to be seen back on the island in a final version. But over the last 10, 15, or 20 years, we've developed also very viable cocoa and chocolate industry. And the first experience I had was a friend who was an artisanal chocolate maker here. And he did a blind tasting with us with beans treated in different ways, beans from different parts of the country. And it was flabbergasting, the differences that you could detect. And that was really my very first introduction to terroir without knowing it at the time. And so I think it's generally the larger philosophy, if you take it outside of the spirits industry as well, is paying homage and respect to your raw material and to the people who grow it. And I think that is really important. And you will see a difference when, even whether you use traditional methods or if you use modern technology, but if you're working with the raw material and treat it with care, you will get better quality, but you also will see those differences. And people very often ask, so how are you going to ensure consistency? Well, we don't need to ensure consistency by having a bland recipe that recreates the same mass product year after year after year. That's not what we're about. We're about showcasing the individuality and quality that you get when you work with the raw material in its authentic form.
Yes, the same here in Colombia. There's a lot of cacao, a lot of chocolate, and also we showcase it in our rum tasting. And of course, different terroirs. It's so big, Colombia, and so different flavors in different types of cacao. Okay, so I know you have to go. I have one last question. What are your plans, personal plans, and I mean the rum, any markets as well you are aiming for? I know you are selling mainly more in Europe for the moment, in the UK market, I think, or anyway in Europe, generally speaking. US and other parts, maybe of South America, are these markets that you are going to try to get to? I imagine the United States is an important part of the of your business plan.
Oh, 2024, Year of the Dragon. It's an exciting year. Yes, so we started out in Europe. France has been our biggest market there. UK, Germany, Switzerland. We're also adding Austria. That's probably wishful thinking on my part. Let's go to Australia. But the US, I think, is a big focus for us. I'm going to head up there next month, in fact. So if anybody's in Chicago listening to this, find me there. We'll be at the Chicago Rum Fest, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's going to be a really big push for us. And I would love to see more spread into South America. So I'm really grateful for you having us or having me today on your podcast and spreading the word and sharing a bit of our story. Really appreciate it because I love to see more South-South collaborations as well.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Jane. And so good luck with your Rum Fest in Chicago. Yeah, these are festivals which are growing everywhere in the world. I also saw you last year in Panama Rum Fest. I was expecting someone, but it was this guy. He's in the whiskey. I don't remember his name, and he loves Renegade. And it's also where I bought a bottle of Renegade. So maybe let's see you. I'm gonna be Panama Rum Fest this year. I don't know if you are planning to go there.
Well, actually, Mark, our CEO, just was in Panama, I think, last week.
Yeah, he was there for a tasting.
He found an old bottling, a Panama bottling from his the precursor of Renegade Rum, his Renegade bottling company. And
Okay.
One of the rums he had bottled from Panama found its way back to Panama and was opened after I don't know how many years.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much, Jane. Have a nice day and good luck with your amazing rums.
Thank you so much. All the best to you.
Thank you.
And utmost success for the podcast and the chocolate and rum tastings and pairings. Everybody, all go to his.
Please.
Take care. Bye.
Ciao, Jane. Thank you. Bye-bye.